Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Radha Govinda Dev Ki Jai. Kali Yuga Dharma Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Welcome. Hare Krishna, good to see you all. It is day 1 of Navaratri. And so I have to greet you all with a happy Navaratri, wishing you all a blissful festival. We are going to speak from Srimad Bhagavatam this evening. And we're going to be speaking a lot from some various other scriptures as the days go on, as we continue on with these 9 nights, which are extremely important. And why? Why are they so important? Why would it be so important to honor such a divine goddess? Well, she is none other than considered the sister of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that right there is enough in and of itself to honor her as first and foremost of all of those divine mothers who can give us their guidance and their protection and their shelter along this path of devotion. She is the embodiment of devotion. If we could think of an embodiment of Shakti Devi, it would be this great goddess. She is embodied within the form of Subhadra Devi, who we worship along with Jagannath and Balabhadra. And she is non-different in her own right from those controllers of the universe. I really enjoy Bhakti Yoga because it gives a very balanced view of divinity. Not simply a male view of divinity, but also a female view of divinity. And the balance that comes when both are worshipped, when both are revered, when both are held within the lotus of the heart. So we can pray to this divine goddess to please help us, protect us along this path, help us achieve our heart's real goals. Not just the goals that are here, like getting money or figuring out this thing called life, but our eternal goals of servants of the supreme divine beings. We heard throughout the past days that in Sri Vrindavan Dham, she is none other than Yogamaya, Sri Krishna's internal energy, who acts as a divine director of pastimes, making sure that Govinda has everything that he wants, making sure that everything happens just the way Govinda wills it, even down to making sure that he forgets that he is the omnipotent Supreme Lord, helping him come under his own illusory energy, saying that I'm just under the control of my mother, my father, my beloveds. This is our Yogamaya. As Mahamaya, we will hear in the coming days how even before there is the thought of Lord Brahma, even before all of this creation is thought of, brought into existence, there is the divine goddess, expanded from the Lord himself. And then he says, this is your realm. You do it. You handle everything. This realm belongs to you. And so often we hear of this material creation as called Devi Dham. So, as we reside in her realm, under her control, a lot of the time, can we help but to find out exactly just what her glories are, what her pastimes are? It is said that she is given the benediction that for those who have true devotion within their hearts, she ushers them closer to Govinda. And for those who do not have devotion within their hearts, but their hearts are filled with selfish motives, she keeps them covered. And she keeps them away from her very own sweet Lord Govindaji. Srila Prabhupada would often say, Maya, who is none other than Durga Devi, has her own service to perform. And she does it quite well. She is there to make sure that Krishna is not disturbed by those who are not serious. So she will put tests in the way. She will guard her beloved Lord with her life. There is no one who will do their service better than Maya Devi. She knows that she is the Lord's very own shadow. And so, she makes sure that if there is a tinge of insincerity, she finds it out, roots it out, and makes sure that it does not disturb her favorite person in all of creation. But, if she deems the heart to be sincere, true in all of its love and devotion, then she clears the way. She makes sure that nothing stands in the way of that person who has a heart full of devotion for her own favorite person. So I pray that she protects us all. I pray that she shelters us. And I pray that she forgives me for any of the mistakes that I probably will make in the course of these 9 days in trying to tell these stories and somehow express my heartfelt gratitude. So, as she is Yogamaya and the director of divine pastimes, of course we'll sing Jai Radha Madhava. Because if there is one place that she loves to be, it is in Vrindavan, making sure that Radha Govinda have ever fresh, ever new pastimes. Everything else she does is a reflection of that yearning, as is the reflection of everybody else. Everyone yearns to be there in Vrindavan, looking at these sweeter than sweet pastimes. So of course we will begin with Jai Radha Madhava, invoking her presence as the Lord's own sister. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalabha Girivaradhari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalabha Girivaradhari Jashodanandana Prajajanranjana Jamuna Tiravana Chari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalabha Girivaradhari Jai Radha Madhava Jai Radha Madhava Radhe Govinda Jaya Radhe Govinda Shri Radha Madhava ki jai. Shri Radha Govinda Devi ki jai. So we hear many times about the month-long observance of Katyayani Vrat, observed by the very gopis of Vrindavan, where they would pray to the goddess Katyayani, who is one of the NavaDurgas, which we will be getting to during these days. And Srila Prabhupada often makes the point that the way the gopis were praying to her was such a beautiful way to pray, one of the best ways to pray. Often people will pray that, "Oh dear divine goddess, please grant me a new car," or "Oh divine goddess, please grant me a new house," or "this great job," or "lots of money." However, the gopis of Vrindavan would often pray, observing this austere vrat for such a long month, and they would just pray, "O divine goddess, O guardian of our hearts, please bless us so that the Lord of our hearts can be ours in this lifetime, in the next, forever and ever. Bless our devotion to Sri Krishna so that he can be ours and we can be his." Srila Prabhupada would often remark that is the best way to pray. In fact, he says that the different gods and goddesses, the different celestial beings, they derive such joy when they hear those kinds of prayers. Rather than granting a new car or money or material things, they derive such joy when they see a soul sincerely praying for devotion, because that is what they are always eager to grant. They are always eager to be in the association of bhakti, in the association of divine, loving, devotional service. It is what they hanker after day of their own existence. So when they get to give that as a boon, they know, if I give this as a boon, then Krishna's mercy will come upon me as well. Because ultimately everybody is trying to get to Krishna. Everyone is trying to witness these pastimes which are unparalleled, never before seen, sweeter than sweet, where the supreme divine person now comes under the control of his people. So it's almost like performing devotional service when we pray to other Vaishnavas, like Durga Devi, like Mahadev himself. When we pray to them for devotional service, it almost becomes devotional service in and of itself. They love to grant those kinds of boons, and therefore they're always called the best friends of the Vaishnavas, the best friends of the lovers of God. Because ultimately, what do we take with us from this life? Nothing but our hearts and what is within our hearts. So if we can't take our cars with us, if we can't take our money with us, if we can't take our houses with us to the next destination, let us pray for the things that we can carry with us. Our hearts, our aspirations, our thoughts, our intentions. Let those be filled with yearnings for devotion, for grace, for mercy, and for divine love above all. So today is the first day of Navaratri, dedicated to Shayla Putri, the daughter of the mountains, the goddess of the hills. And as Shayla Putri, we have to kind of understand why she would have appeared in this form as the daughter of the mountain king, Himavan. Why take that form at all? As Adi Shakti, she was already maintaining so much of this material creation. She has her domain, she has unlimited amounts of power. So why take this form as the daughter of Mount Himavan? Well, that is the basis of tonight's session. It is a little bit of a long story, and it comes from Srimad Bhagavatam. And we'll read from this condensed Bhagavatam that we have seen before by His Grace Purna Pragya, compiled from the many, many volumes and cantos that Srila Prabhupada also translated and gave purports and commentaries to. So we're going to dive into that. And we're going to go through this story and find out why she eventually took the form of Shayla Putri. What prompted Adi Shakti to come as a girl, devoted to Lord Shiva himself? What would have prompted all of the gods to beg her to once again come in a tangible form? What would have brought the universe to such a state where all of the governing celestials of all of creation would be sitting on the edge of their seats in confusion, in anxiety, worrying about the fate of all of creation? So much so that they would all go to Adi Shakti and pray that she would once again grace this creation with a form of hers. So this story begins with Daksha and his daughter Dakshayani, or Sati. Daksha was the son of Lord Brahma. And as such, he was given the task of populating the earthly realms. So there were many, many beings called Prajapatis, progenitors. And they were given the task, after Lord Brahma had created and done so many different creations, they were given the task of populating these planets, these realms, making sure that they were well inhabited. So Daksha was one of these great Prajapatis. In fact, he was the head of the Prajapatis, a very important man. And he knew very well what his importance was. He was quite proud of his importance. And one of his daughters, Sati, had chosen for her own consort Lord Shiva. Daksha has many daughters. Some of them are married to the moon god. Some of them are married to the god of fire, Agni. And then they have children, which it says in Srimad Bhagavatam, between Agni and his sons and then their offspring, there are 49 fire gods. So sometimes we think, wow, how many gods are there? Somewhere roughly around 33 million. There are very many celestials. So at least 49 fire gods. And so Daksha, he gives his daughters as the wives of many of these people. So Sati has chosen Lord Shiva to be her lord, her consort. Sati, of course, is none other than Adi Shakti, who has now taken this form as the daughter of Daksha, Dakshayani. However, Daksha is not happy with Sati's choice. Daksha feels that Lord Shiva is unfit for his gently bred daughter. He says, my daughter is a princess, and Lord Shiva is a wild person. He has matted hair. He lives wherever. He roams everywhere, sometimes without clothes even. He doesn't even set up a residence properly. How do I know that he's going to take care of my gently bred daughter, who is a princess? But Sati has given her heart to Lord Shiva, and she will hear of no one else. Lord Brahma, Daksha's own father, approves of this match. Not only does he approve of it, he encourages it. And so he asks Daksha, please give your daughter to Lord Shiva. Let them be united. Give her her heart's desire. And so Daksha, on the advice of Lord Brahma, his own father, marries Sati and Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva resets up his home, even though he is often known to wander in various places. For the sake of Sati, he sets up his home in Mount Kailash, and Kailash all of a sudden gets like a touch of spring. They have a goddess. All of Lord Shiva's followers are quite happy. Lord Shiva himself is quite happy. He is enamored by his princess, his very own sweet goddess. One day, as was often happening, there was a grand sacrifice that Daksha was performing. And this sacrifice was to please so many of the gods. So all of the gods are invited. Lord Brahma sits at the head of the assembly, at the head of this great sacrifice. And there are so many of the other gods who attend with their wives. Lord Shiva also attends with Sati. And many of his followers are also there present. And when this great sacrifice was to take place, at the moment when Daksha walks in, his effulgence is so bright that it seems that everything around him dims in comparison. Daksha is such a majestic personality that it seems as though he leeches all of the majesty all of the brightness from every other personality in the room. And so out of an innate form of respect, out of an innate showing of respect, everyone rises to greet Daksha the Prajapati. Everyone except two people. Lord Brahma, because he is the father of Daksha, and Lord Shiva. At this point, Lord Shiva is seated in deep meditation. And Lord Shiva does not rise. Seeing that his own father, Lord Brahma, has not risen, Daksha's fine. He understands this is my father, and he is actually the head of this assembly, and so that's all right. However, when Daksha spots that Lord Shiva, his own son-in-law, has not risen to greet him, has not offered him the proper respect that he thinks he should be offered, Daksha is enraged. And he begins to speak very strongly to the assembly. And this is where we pick up this story. So within the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear of Daksha's words. His eyes glowing with rage, Daksha addressed the assembly. Please hear me with attention, for I am not speaking out of envy or ignorance. Actually, our Vaishnav commentators say that he was speaking out of both envy and ignorance, unfortunately. Shiva has polluted the path of gentle manners, and by doing so, he is spoiling the good reputation of the demigods. By marrying my daughter, he has become my subordinate. And yet, he is so shameless that he did not even bother to stand up to receive me or offer me any words of welcome. He lives in filthy places like crematoriums, and his companions are all ghosts and demons. He does not bathe regularly, and he decorates his body with ashes and garlands that are made of skulls and bones. Going naked like a madman, he sometimes laughs and sometimes cries, and thus he is Shiva, auspicious in name only. It is because of Lord Brahma's request that I gave my chaste daughter to him, even though he is devoid of cleanliness and all good behavior. Because of his anger, Daksha did not even want to acknowledge that Lord Brahma was his own father, and so he referred to him merely as Parameshti, the supreme teacher. In this way, Daksha indirectly accused Brahma of being less intelligent for having advised him to hand over his beautiful daughter to such a nasty fellow. After speaking to the assembly, Daksha washed his hands and mouth. Then, while looking at Lord Shiva as if he were an enemy, Daksha cursed him, saying, Lord Shiva, who is the lowest of demigods, should no longer receive a share of the sacrificial offerings. So, we think sometimes we hear of family drama between couples nowadays. It was nothing compared to what was harboring in Daksha's heart for Lord Shiva. This is nothing. All the drama that happens now is nothing compared to what had happened in yugas previous. However, we will soon find out what happens when this kind of enmity sparks up. After saying this, Daksha angrily stormed out of the assembly despite the attempts of others to pacify him. Actually, this so-called curse was a great blessing for a devotee like Lord Shiva, for it gave him the opportunity to avoid the association of the materialistic demigods. So, Lord Shiva actually wanted nothing to do with any of them. Lord Shiva is so happy in his meditation. And we'll find out why in a moment. Although Lord Shiva remained calm and tolerant, one of his principal associates, Nandi, became enraged, and so he counter-cursed Daksha and the Brahmins that had sided with him. Nandi said, Whoever, due to envy, has accepted Daksha to be more important than Lord Shiva will become bereft of all transcendental knowledge. Because Daksha is simply attached to his body and sex indulgence, and is thus devoid of any good intelligence, he will soon receive the face of a goat. May those who have insulted Lord Shiva, due to having become as dull as matter by the cultivation of materialistic education, continue in the cycle of repeated birth and death. Since the Brahmanas who supported Daksha perform religious rituals only for the purpose of maintaining their bodies, let them become bereft of all discrimination as to what is fit to eat and what is not. Let them beg for money, going door to door, simply for the purpose of gratifying their senses. So we hear that Nandi is quite upset, very angry. And we hear of what happens to those who disrespect the greatest of all Vaishnavas, Lord Shiva. After hearing this, Bhrigu retaliated on behalf of the hereditary Brahmanas by condemning the followers of Lord Shiva with such a strong Brahminical curse. Those who follow Lord Shiva will become atheists and thus diverted from genuine Vedic principles. The devotees of Lord Shiva are so foolish that they try to imitate him by having long hair, and they subsist upon wine, flesh, and other such abominable things. Because they blaspheme the Brahmanas, who are true followers of Vedic principles, the devotees of Lord Shiva must be considered to have already come under the sway of atheistic doctrine. So now, everyone is upset. And when everybody gets upset, there's just cursing and counter-cursing, and no one is even thinking about the consequences. Their anger gets such a hold of them that they can no longer control their senses. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna himself says, "From contemplation of the objects of the senses, lust arises." Such attachment arises for them. And when that attachment is not satisfied, when that attachment is not fulfilled, there is anger. From anger comes bewilderment of memory. And from that anger and the bewilderment of memory, one loses all good intelligence. They lose all good sense. And then they're caught. They're caught like that in the web of materialistic cycles. So we can see this acting out in front of us, even by celestial persons. Daksha had such attachment for his pride. And when that attachment was not satisfied, he got angry. Daksha cursed, and then the followers of Lord Shiva cursed, and then the followers of Daksha were counter-cursing, and in this way everybody lost all good intelligence. While such cursing and counter-cursing was going on, Lord Shiva became very morose. And then, without saying anything, he suddenly left the assembly, followed by his disciples. So Lord Shiva thought it best not to argue. He simply left, feeling very sad. Thereafter, the Prajapatis continued worshipping the Supreme Lord Vishnu by the performance of sacrifice for 1,000 years. Then at last, after taking the Avabrita Snan at the confluence of the Ganga and Jamuna, they returned home. Thereafter, the tension between Lord Shiva and Daksha continued for a long time. Then once, Daksha performed a Vajpaya sacrifice, and afterwards he commenced another great sacrifice, called Brahaspati Sava. Because Lord Brahma had appointed him the chief of all Prajapatis, Daksha had become very puffed up, and so he dared to perform these sacrifices without inviting Lord Shiva. It is a fact that one can satisfy Lord Vishnu even without worshipping the various demigods. But on the other hand, he wants that his great devotees should be satisfied first. Therefore, the fact that Daksha purposefully neglected Lord Shiva, the greatest Vaishnav, was not befitting. The great demigods and sages came from all over the universe to attend Daksha's sacrifice, and thus Sati could hear them conversing as they flew overhead in their celestial airplanes. When Sati saw how the wives of the denizens of heaven were gorgeously dressed and decorated with fine ornaments, she addressed her husband with great anxiety. Sati said, "My dear Lord Shiva, Your father-in-law is preparing to perform a great sacrifice. All of the other demigods have been invited along with their wives, and so we may also go, if you desire. My sisters and their husbands are certainly going there to visit their relatives. Therefore, I also want to dress up and go there, wearing the ornaments given to me by my father. Due to our family feud, I have not visited my father's house for such a long time, and so I am very anxious to see my relatives. I know that you are very exalted and thus do not care for these social functions, but I am a poor woman, and so I want to go. How can a daughter remain undisturbed after hearing that a festival is taking place at her father's house? So remember when I said that ladies love a wonderful festival. Since time immemorial, we have loved a wonderful festival. I know that we have not been invited, but there is no harm if one goes to the house of a friend, husband, spiritual master, or father without an invitation. My dear Lord, please be kind upon me and fulfill my desire. According to the commentaries of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, she also asks Lord Shiva at this time that this whole problem occurred because of the feud between Lord Shiva and her father. And she says, why couldn't you have just stood up to welcome my father? I know that you are the most respectful person. I know that you are not prideful. Why couldn't you have just stood to receive my father and give him respect? I know you have no problem with that. And according to our acharyas, Lord Shiva answers, my dearest, I would have, had I been there. At that moment when your father entered the assembly, I was deep in meditation. It is said that Lord Shiva meditates on Lord Vasudeva, Lord Sankarshan. Vasudeva is not just a person. It is also said within Bhagavatam that Vasudeva is also a place. It is a state of being. And so, Vasudeva is the proprietor, the owner of that state, Vasudeva, where the mind, the body, and all of the senses are engaged in that devotional service. So Lord Shiva says, let me give you a view into what happens during my meditation. During my meditation, my Supreme Lord calls me. It's not that I just think, oh, let me go into meditation. My Lord calls me and asks me for service. When he calls, I must run there. And so my Lord called. I had to go. There was nothing else I could do. And so although my body was seated in the assembly of Daksha, all of my senses, my mind, my very soul was in service to my divine Lord Vasudeva. And so I was unaware of what was going on around me. My dear, I wasn't there. Otherwise, I certainly would have stood up to welcome your father. I always thought of this as such a wonderful example of Lord Shiva's renunciation. Lord Shiva does not renounce constantly thinking of what he has to renounce. He is simply so wrapped up in his meditation on his worshipful Lord, who is none other than Lord Krishna, that he simply is unaware of everything else that goes on around him. He's unaware of the passage of time. He's unaware of eating and sleeping. He's unaware of the external habits of everyone else. All he knows is that devotional service. All glories to Lord Shiva, the best friend of the Vaishnavas, the greatest of all Vaishnavas. So this is why Lord Shiva did not stand up to receive his father-in-law. And I also have to give all of my pranams and respects to Vaisheshika Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for giving your blessings. Thank you. So, Sati is saying, if you desire, we can go. Even without an invitation. It's my father's home. There will be no kind of offense if we go without an invitation. If you give me the word, then we can go. Although he very well remembered Daksha's malicious and heart-piercing words, Lord Shiva smilingly replied, My dear beautiful wife, it is true that one may go to a friend's house without an invitation. But this is true only if such a friend does not find fault with one and become angry due to being in the bodily conception of life. It is a fact that education, austerity, wealth, beauty, youth, and family heritage are desirable qualities. But if one becomes proud because of possessing them, he loses all good sense and cannot appreciate the glories of spiritually exalted personalities. One should not go to anyone's house who looks upon his guest with raised eyebrows and angry eyes. The pain that is caused by an enemy's arrows is not as great as that which is caused by the sharp words uttered by a relative, for such grief continues to burn one's heart day and night. I have read and reread this line so many times in my life. The pain that is caused by an enemy's arrows is not as great as that which is caused by the sharp words uttered by a relative, for such grief continues to burn one's heart day and night. My dear Sati, although you are Daksha's pet daughter, even if you go without me, he will not honor you because of your being my wife, and thus you will regret your connection with me. Materially puffed up persons who are always disturbed in body and mind cannot tolerate the spiritual opulence of self-realized souls. So we see, in his own estimation, Lord Shiva looks as though he is materially bereft, but he says he has spiritual opulence, the spiritual opulence of self-realized souls. So even though he is quite humble, he knows very well what his position is and what Daksha's idea of him is. So let us remember that when we think that we don't have as much wealth as the next person, that we might not be as materially rich, if we are working on the path of trying sincerely to become self-realized, we have all the spiritual opulence that one could ever want. All we have to do is endeavor. Just keep trying. Because I am always offering obeisances unto Lord Vasudeva in pure consciousness, I naturally respect all living entities in whose bodies he resides, which is everyone. My dear wife, because your father is envious of me, he will surely insult you if you go there. If you are still thinking to go, then I must warn you that for a respectable person like you, an insult from a relative is equal to death. He knows that she would take that insult so hard, that it would affect her so greatly, that he doesn't know if she would be able to recover. As Lord Shiva became silent, Sati was seen moving this way and that on account of her indecision. It says that she would step closer to the doorway, and then she would come back, and then she would think some more, and then she would go forward to the doorway, and then she would come back, constantly wondering, knowing that she wants to go and see this festival, but also wanting to heed the words of her dearest heart, her dearest consort. She was very anxious to see her relatives, but at the same time she was afraid to do so because of her husband's warning. Feeling very aggrieved because Lord Shiva had forbidden her to go, Sati began to tremble as tears fell from her eyes. Indeed, due to becoming very agitated, she gave her husband such a hurt look that it appeared as if she would burn him to ashes. Having nowhere else to take out her hurt and her anger, all she could do was look at poor Lord Shiva. Finally, while breathing very heavily due to her anger and bereavement, Sati departed impetuously for her father's house, having lost all good intelligence because of womanly weakness. And so that womanly weakness that is spoken about is her affection for her father, her not being able to cut off ties with her father and simply cast him aside, even though he was not a favorable person toward her senior Vaishnav of a husband. So that weakness is actually her compassionate heart, trying to think of things from all different angles, trying to find out every single angle, a way in which everyone could be happy. She wanted to see her relatives, but she wanted her father to respect her husband, and still her father was not respecting her husband, and so she wanted to finally find a way to do something about this. Finally, she decided that she had to go. Seeing Sati leave, Lord Shiva's disciples, headed by Maniman, who were ready to sacrifice everything for their Lord, quickly followed her, along with thousands of yakshas. Knowing that Lord Shiva did not want his wife to go alone, they seated Sati upon Nandi, the bull, and gave her the bird that she kept as a pet. Indeed, they arranged a very pompous and royal procession by covering her with a nice canopy and providing musical accompaniment, along with the sounding of conch shells and bugles. This is their queen. So they gave her a retinue due for a queen, fit for the queen of Kailash. When Sati arrived at her father's sacrificial arena, which was filled with the sound of Vedic mantras, out of fear of Daksha, none of the assembled demigods or sages received her very well. Although her mother and sisters welcomed her in a very pleasing manner, with gladdened faces and moistened eyes, Sati did not reply. Even though she was offered a nice seat and various gifts, Sati refused to accept anything because her father had neither welcomed her nor asked about her welfare. So he wouldn't even look at her. He wouldn't even acknowledge her. This is her father who had brought her up with all love and compassion, and now he's acting as though they don't have any connection whatsoever. It's not even Sati's fault. Then, when she saw that no arrangements had been made in the sacrificial arena for offerings to be made to her husband, Sati became so angry that she appeared ready to burn Daksha with her red, hot eyes. Upon seeing her mood, Lord Shiva's followers were prepared to kill Daksha, but Sati checked them. Then, within the hearing of all, Sati chastised her own father, saying, "Lord Shiva is the foremost personality, and he is beloved by all due to his being free from enmity. Thus it is only you who could be envious of him. Your only business is to find faults in others, whereas Lord Shiva magnifies whatever good qualities he sees. Still, it is not astonishing that a person who has accepted the body as the self should always engage in deriding great souls. You consider my husband to be inauspicious, but do you think that Lord Brahma is a fool? He accepts the flowers offered at the lotus feet of Lord Shiva and places them upon his head with great respect. If one hears blasphemy of the Lord or his representative, he should block his ears and go away, if he is unable to punish the offender. But if one is able to, then he should forcibly cut out the blasphemer's tongue, and then after killing him, he should give up his own life. Since you are my father, and because others might accuse my husband of having employed me to do what he could not, I will not kill you. Instead, I will give up this abominable body I have received from you. If someone has swallowed poisonous food, the best treatment is to vomit. My dear father, the opulence of Lord Shiva is impossible for you or your flatterers to imagine, because persons who perform great fruitive sacrifices for gratifying their bodies can hardly understand the position of self-realized souls. I am very ashamed of my bodily relationship with you because you are an offender at the lotus feet of Lord Shiva. Indeed, whenever my husband addresses me as Dakshayani, I become very morose. Now, I will give up the body that I had received from you." Sati finds it better, in an act of supreme defiance, saying, if I cannot somehow convince you to give up this attitude of enmity against my dear father, if I cannot get you to give up this way of acting, better that I give up all connection with you. And I can't give up connection with you because this body was received from you. And if this body was received from you, I don't want it. In the greatest act of defiance ever known, Sati, who was dressed in saffron-colored cloth, sat on the ground facing north. After purifying herself by touching water, she closed her eyes and began to absorb her mind in meditation upon the lotus feet of Lord Shiva. Then as Sati gradually raised her life air to between her eyebrows, she meditated upon the fiery air that is within the body. As a result, Sati became engulfed in a blazing fire, and in this way, she gave up the body her father had given her. She did this so that she could have another birth that would allow her uncontaminated association with her Lord. So she knew that she had the power as a divine goddess to obtain another birth where she would be uncontaminated by this association with Daksa, who was so hateful towards Lord Shiva. This is the example of someone who cannot tolerate hearing the abuse of a Vaishnav, hearing all of the offense towards the Vaishnav who was so much dearest to her very own heart. Lord Shiva was her life and soul. And so she gives the actions that are approved by Scripture. If one hears blasphemy of the Lord or his representative, he should block his ears and go away if he is unable to punish the offender. But if one is able to, then he should forcibly cut out the blasphemer's tongue, and then after killing him, he should give up his own life. This is the heart of a Kshatriya. This is the heart of the greatest souls of bygone eras. We don't often possess those kinds of hearts anymore. But this was the heart of the goddess. And so she says, "Since you are my father, and because others might accuse my husband of having employed me to do what he could not, I will not kill you." She thought about it. But she says it wouldn't be right. And for the pages of history, they would condemn me. And they would condemn my husband. Let alone them condemning me, I don't care. But they might condemn my husband, saying, "You got a woman to do what you would not do and kill your own father-in-law." She says, instead of killing you, all I can do is give up this body which has its connection with you. And so Sati gives up her life. Lord Shiva is Trikalagya. He knows past, present, and future. It was quite prophetic when he says to her, "When you go there and your father insults you, having to bear the insults of such a relative will be like death for you." In a way, he knows, with a heavy, burdened heart, that if his wife goes, it may very well be the last time he ever sees her. A tumultuous uproar resounded all over the universe as the denizens of heaven exclaimed, "Oh, why has Sati, the wife of the most respectable demigod, quit her body in anger? How could Daksha have been so cruel to his own daughter, who was such a chaste and exalted girl? Obviously, he is so hard-hearted that he is unworthy of being called a Brahmana. Daksha will surely become infamous for having offended the Supreme Lord and for failing to prevent the death of his own daughter. He could have prevented it. He could have stopped it. He could have stepped in at any moment. His pride got the better of him. And so he insulted Sati, and he insulted Lord Shiva. And now the universe is condemning him. While the members of the assembly spoke again amongst themselves in the same way, the followers of Lord Shiva prepared to kill Daksha with their weapons. To atone for having failed to protect their mistress, they were ready to give up their own lives after first killing the offender. As the ghosts and yakshas rushed at Daksha, however, Bhrigu quickly offered oblations into the southern side of the sacrificial fire while uttering mantras from the Yajur Veda, meant for counteracting those who disrupt sacrificial performances. Instantly, thousands of demigods named Ribus appeared from the fire, and due to being invested with Soma's energy, they were extremely powerful. Thus, by dint of the superior Brahma Tejas, when the Ribus attacked Lord Shiva's followers with half-burnt wood from the sacrificial fire, they panicked and began fleeing in all directions. It is at this moment that all of the followers of Lord Shiva return to Mount Kailash to tell Lord Shiva what has happened. When Lord Shiva hears what has happened, can we imagine the scene? These great, powerful entities, some with subtle bodies, some with tangible bodies, great Nandi himself, thousands of yakshas, they journey back to their master. And they have to tell them that their very own goddess has departed. They have to explain to him how they failed to protect her, how he himself sent them with her, and how she was so upset and so hurt by the words of her father